In the summer of 2025, a seismic shift in global energy occurred, almost invisibly. The world's oil markets, always volatile, suddenly faced a disruption that no analyst had predicted, and few even noticed at first. Without warning or announcement, China, the world's largest crude importer, stopped buying American oil. The flow of tankers that once crossed the Pacific slowed to a halt, leaving ports eerily quiet. Tanker schedules were canceled, port bookings expired, and future orders vanished. The digital boards that once buzzed with activity now displayed only cancellations and empty slots. The silence was strategic. No statements, no targets for protest, just a sudden, total decoupling. Executives and officials waited for explanations that never came. For years, American crude exports to China symbolized global interdependence. Now that link was gone overnight. Decades of negotiation and partnership seemed to evaporate in a single moment. In Texas and Louisiana, supertankers sat idle, and traders realized this was no temporary lull. The infrastructure built for a booming trade now stood as a monument to a vanished era. The American oil industry, built around Chinese demand, was blindsided. Workers, investors, and entire communities felt the shock ripple through their lives. Beijing's silence denied Washington any clear response. Diplomats and negotiators were left in the dark, searching for answers that never arrived. This was a new kind of great power competition, fought with logistics, not armies. The battlefield was the global supply chain, and the weapons were contracts and cancellations. The world had changed, not with a bang, but with the quiet cancellation of shipping orders. In the silence, a new era of uncertainty had begun. The trigger wasn't oil, but geopolitics, specifically, the U.S. threat of secondary sanctions over China's trade with Russia during the Ukraine conflict. As the war in Ukraine escalated, Washington's attention turned to Beijing's growing economic ties with Moscow, raising alarms in Western capitals about the potential for China to undermine the effectiveness of sanctions on Russia. Washington's ultimatum was clear: support Russia and risk being cut off from the U.S. financial system. The message was unmistakable. Any nation, even a global powerhouse like China, would face severe consequences for defying American sanctions policy. For Beijing, this was a red line, a challenge to its sovereignty and its right to conduct independent foreign policy. The Chinese leadership saw the threat as an attempt to limit its influence and dictate its choices on the world stage. China's response was subtle but powerful: halt American oil imports, striking at U.S. economic interests without open confrontation. This move was calculated, designed to send a message while avoiding direct escalation. As U.S. diplomats scrambled over Ukraine, China's move shifted the global balance, signaling that Russia wasn't isolated and a new economic bloc was emerging. The world watched as alliances began to shift, and the old order was quietly challenged. By cutting U.S. oil, China secured its own energy and sent a message: there's an alternative to the American-led order. Beijing began strengthening ties with other energy suppliers, ensuring its economy would not be held hostage by Western pressure. Other nations, wary of U.S. sanctions, took note. The world's capitals started to reconsider their own positions, weighing the risks and rewards of aligning too closely with either side. The Ukraine conflict accelerated a global realignment. Nations were forced to choose sides, not just diplomatically but economically. Trade routes shifted, and financial markets reflected the growing uncertainty as the world split into competing spheres of influence. China's decision was a declaration. It would lead a parallel system, independent of Washington's dictates. This was more than a policy shift. It was a signal that the global balance of power was changing. The silent oil shock was more than retaliation. It was the first act in building a new world order, one where economic power and political influence are no longer concentrated in the West, but are being redefined by new alliances and bold moves. China's move wasn't impulsive. It was the result of a decade of planning. While the world watched its cities rise, Beijing built a great wall of energy and financial infrastructure to shield itself from foreign pressure. Pipelines from Russia and Central Asia, a network of ports across Asia, and alternative payment systems were all in place. The halt of U.S. oil was simply activating a long-prepared plan. China's new supply chains and financial systems, like CIPs and the digital Yuan, were ready to bypass the dollar. When the moment came, China flipped the switch. American leverage evaporated. U.S. policymakers who thought interdependence meant control were stunned. China hadn't just built a wall, it had built a whole new house next door. With U.S. oil out of the equation, China was forced to pivot quickly to its alternatives, redrawing global energy flows in ways the world hadn't seen before. The country's energy strategy became more ambitious, more global, and more determined than ever. Russia and Iran, both long at odds with Washington, stepped in to become China's main suppliers, paid in yuan, immune to US sanctions and financial pressure. This new arrangement allowed these countries to bypass Western restrictions and strengthen their own economies. For Russia, this was an economic lifeline, keeping its oil industry afloat and its revenues flowing despite global tensions. For Iran, it was a rare chance to openly sell oil at scale, breaking free from years of isolation and sanctions. The new Energy Silk Road let China secure energy supplies through vast networks of pipelines, railways, and shipping routes, all while undermining US efforts to isolate its rivals and reshape the global order. The biggest shift, however, came in the Persian Gulf, a region long dominated by the dollar and Western influence. Gulf states, seeing China as their top customer and eager to diversify, began accepting yuan for oil, signaling a new era in global trade. This wasn't hostility toward the West, it was pragmatic business, a calculated move to secure their own futures in a changing world. But it shook the very foundations of the petrodollar system, sending shockwaves through global finance and energy markets. For the first time since the 1970s, the world's oil producers had a real viable alternative to the dollar. Oil producers could now choose, stick with the dollar and US policy, or diversify into yuan and tap into China's vast, ever-growing market. This choice gave them unprecedented leverage, and for the first time, the global energy market was no longer a one-currency game. China wasn't just buying oil, it was building influence, forging new alliances, and reshaping the rules of global trade. It was selling a new vision of global commerce, one where the yuan, not the dollar, stood at the center of energy and trade. With the yuan rising in prominence, the world's financial landscape was being redrawn in real time. The petrodollar's monopoly was broken, and a new era of competition had begun. The global energy market had fundamentally changed, setting the stage for a new balance of power in the 21st century. The fallout hit hardest on the US Gulf Coast. Towns built on the shale boom and Chinese demand faced sudden economic collapse. Idle supertankers, layoffs, and shuttered businesses became the new reality. The pain rippled through communities. Dock workers, engineers, and rig crews all lost jobs. Local economies crumbled, restaurants and dealerships emptied. Washington's tools, unemployment benefits, retraining, couldn't replace a lost customer of China's scale. The crisis exposed America's risky dependence on a single foreign buyer. Interdependence, once a strength, had become a vulnerability. The silent oil shock shattered faith in the promise of globalization. The deepest impact was on the petrodollar, the foundation of US global power since the 1970s. China's yuan-based oil market proved a real alternative, inspiring others to follow. India, Brazil, and Argentina began exploring non-dollar trade. Even US allies diversified reserves and encouraged euro settlements. The idea of de-dollarization moved from fringe to mainstream. Gulf states, while keeping security ties with Washington, started accepting yuan, signaling shifting allegiances. By late 2025, the petrodollar wasn't dead, but its monopoly was gone. The world was splintering into competing currency blocks. The dollar remained dominant, but no longer unchallenged. China's oil shock had cracked the central pillar of American financial supremacy. The global financial order was now more fragmented and more competitive. The summer of 2025 marked the end of American primacy and the rise of a multipolar world. The silent oil shock was the opening move in a new contest. Not about ideology, but about the rules of the global system. The US defended its old order. China built a parallel one, offering nations an alternative path. Now countries navigate a complex landscape, relying on the US for security, China for trade, and others for stability. Power is being redefined. Economic leverage and control of supply chains now rival military might. China's move showed that interdependence can be weaponized. As 2025 ends, the world is more unpredictable, with two rival systems vying for influence. The silent oil shock wasn't just an event, it was the dawn of a new age.